Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Mark Marquette. So glad you've joined us in our studios in downtown Titusville. We have with us Rachel Tillman, who is an advocate of the Viking landers almost 50 years ago. Rachel,
Yeah,
thank you so much for being here on Stay Curious.
absolutely. It's my pleasure, and thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. You have come at a very interesting day in our museum. Have you seen a lot of activity here? What a mega day at the museum. Marty Winkle, my co-producer, for 5 years and 1,300 episodes. He was given a tour to about 20 guests that are coming to the International Space Development Conference this
Oh yeah.
weekend in
Hmm.
Orlando at the Rosen Center. Jim Tully, former shuttle worker and mayor of the town, was with another group of them. Then I gave him a talk and went over Spaceview Park and we toured that.
Nice.
And then we had all these people come in, including the
My
lady from
friend
Brazil
Gia,
that you know,
Colombia. Yeah, Gia from
Colombia,
Colombia. Yeah,
Colombia
yeah, that was
in
awesome.
there. Yeah, we had a lot of great energy in here right to the end. So
Yeah.
if we're always a few minutes late, you know that we're going to be staying curious with you no matter what. But Rachel and I've had a good time talking. We're both very into Mars. I did science projects on Mars in junior high school, and we're going to talk about what she's doing today. And I forgot to put that your slide up at the beginning there, but let's.
Quite all
Marty
right.
Winkle chose the backdrop here, Mars, and we might be going. There might be a couple slides out of sequence there, Marty. Yeah, we got all kinds of slides out of sequence here. What's going on
Oh,
here?
we'll have fun
We'll
anyway.
have fun anyway. There's
Quite all
Rachel
right.
in the promotion. Uh, she is briefly tell us you're going to talk at the Brevard Astronomical
Hmm.
Society
Yeah.
tomorrow in at the Italian American Club, and we're going to here's the slide of that. Yep, good. That's at least linked up there. Good and
Looking forward to that.
good. And you've
It'll be
been
fun.
you have a direct connection to the Viking landers. And we'll talk about that here. Well,
Hmm.
just tell us a little bit about what motivated you to do this. You're on kind of a crusade to not forget about
Yeah.
orbiters and landers launched in 1975, landing on Mars in 76. Kind of forgotten about when you got two SUV-sized rovers on Mars right now doing great science.
Yeah.
But this is where it all started a half a century ago.
Yeah, it is absolutely where it all started. I will say that we were not the first to hit Mars, so there was a not so soft landing. So we have to give props to the Soviets for hitting the planet, getting that far. But Viking was the first successful landing on the surface of Mars, and it for me it started before I was born because my father was a scientist on the mission, and even before he worked on the Viking mission, he actually worked as a student at MIT on the Voyager mission to Mars,
Hmm.
which was before Viking.
Okay.
So that history was important and also, has also been forgotten. And it's
Mariner mission to Mars, you think?
the
Voyager went to the
Voyager.
outer
Nope,
planets.
the Voyager mission to Mars.
Okay. Oh, there was a
There
Voyager
was
to
a Voyager
Mars.
mission to Mars, and
Okay.
that it's been
Before some of our
forgotten.
intelligent viewers out there start going crazy, Voyager was
That's
the
right.
grand tour of the planet. So there was a
Yeah.
Voyager Mars program.
Voyager was the first name for the Mars mission, the first Mars mission plan, which was a Saturn rocket and 2 days of science.
Hmm.
And it was going to launch in 1973.
Wow.
So
Okay.
that turned very quickly, and I'll talk about it a lot more tomorrow in the talk, the astronaut with the Astronautical Society. But it's for me, it's I was born into this, and I kept discovering somewhere around 30 years ago that people weren't remembering what Viking was. And I actually asked NASA people, hey, you want to work with me on preserving this? And they're like, nah, it's a lander. We do rovers.
Huh.
And so what we're doing is not just preserving the history, but we're actually reconstructing it. So
And you're going
we
to see with kids reconstructing it here. So,
literally and
well, we have a
figuratively.
little Mars quake going on there as Marty's moving us around there, which are a real thing on there. So much science on Mars has happened in the
Yeah.
21st century, and we've talked some about that. Just want to mention this is the lander in the background. That looks
Yeah.
great, Marty. on there. You see the antenna communicating with Earth there. We'll
S-band.
briefly talk about some of the science that did it on there. American flags on there, okay. It actually
What's
landed
behind me?
in 1976 during the bicentennial year on there. So we're popping off with a question already from Marty. Go ahead.
I have a question. Do you know what mission to Mars was launched in around 1970? So I was on the launch pad up on LC-39A, 320-foot level, and I was watching Mars.
So
launch.
Mariner 9 was would have been before that. That was the orbital mission to
It
Mars.
could have been 1969.
Yeah, it might have probably been 1969.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been the Mariner 9 mission. I would think. That
We
makes
welcome
sense.
your question. We've
All questions.
put a little bit of effort into doing this with some interesting interruptions that you got to see us in action here up there. Cliff Watson's up very early in Pomona, Australia. Good brekkie to you on a Wednesday, buddy. You're already in the hump day. And Steve Jokums remembers Viking as marking America's bicentennial, which was a cool thing. To see pictures of Mars in color from the surface was just a phenomenal thing. And they operated for a while, 9 months or maybe longer, and so they could see sunrises, sunsets, and frost even on pictures on Mars. And we learned a lot about Mars.
Yeah.
And by way of what this slide is for Rachel to tell us why it's important to study Mars.
Well, it's really interesting because when you think about, I mean, so I preserve history of this mission, but planets have history, right? So what we know Mars is now is nothing like what it was before,
Yes.
right? And so when you look at those pictures, it gives you an idea of what the history of Mars might have been, what it might have been like some time ago, because we know that there was water. We know there's still water, ice, a lot of things that we've discovered. And one of the cool things about learning the history of Mars is that we now have missions such as MAVEN who've studied the volatiles that are literally the ions that are being stripped away from the planet. And by the way, they are being stripped away from all planets by the sun. So that does affect everything about the planet, right? So Mars is different now because of those processes. And again, you can learn a lot more about that from the MAVEN mission. And the PI, principal investigator for MAVEN, was actually a student that worked on the Viking mission. So talk about the heritage there too.
Yeah.
So
MAVEN's Mars atmospheric volatile
all
EM.
yeah, and all of those things. I mean, you look at the origin essentially of these planets, and what we are living in now is very different from what it'll be many centuries from now, millions of years from now. So
Well, we're going to set you up here a little bit, those that don't know about Mars, and then we're going to talk about your Mars Preservation Society. Doug Forrest is in Los Angeles. He can't wait to hear about that. Mitch Rothman's in Colorado. We've got Chris Calley is in Connecticut. Dave Stangy's up in Michigan. Looking forward to your story, he says.
Nice.
Dean Babcock is in Illinois. Carlton Bailey's just down the block here in Canaveral Grove. Steve Yoakum's up in Fox Lake, Illinois. And Tom Celentano's in Connecticut. So this is sort of our regulars, Rachel, that love spend a little social time with each other each day. And they share, like, and tell other people that American Space Museum video podcast has the most interesting content, we feel. Not because Marty and I put it on, but because we're a forum for guests like you to talk about what you're doing out there, really making a difference in education and awareness of things. And Mars is your baby. So wanted to set it up with nothing, absolutely nothing in space has occupied the mind of man more than Mars over the last couple hundred years. Here's some of the popular books that we've all read. If you're a Mars nut, I read everything that Ray Bradbury published, and Edgar Rice Burroughs with his that he created a whole scenario about Mars. And
Ray Bradbury, of course.
Yeah, Ray Bradbury, H.G. Wells, War of the Worlds. Yeah. It was reprised many times, and then of course we know that many of you enjoy this actor, okay, Matt Damon, in a very popular movie, The Martian.
Absolutely.
What did you think of The Martian?
I thought it was fun. I mean, I enjoyed it. You know, of course, I can't help but do the same thing that a lot of the folks that worked on missions on Mars did, which is to say things like, yeah, dust storms actually don't have a lot of force on Mars because we have
Yeah, they
a
couldn't
much
knock the
lower
rocket over
atmosphere.
to set up in there,
No,
but
yeah, we wouldn't have that issue. And I actually had, it was funny because I had Vikings sending me emails during the movie when the movie was just released. There was this whole discussion. And there was like, that's not what would happen. But I loved it. I thought it was fun.
yeah, well, I love. There was some,
I mean,
Hollywood liberties taken there, and the
yeah,
Mars soil is actually way too acidy to,
yeah,
and other
for
things in it
potatoes
for
and yeah,
potatoes.
absolutely.
But and I've enjoyed watching it, and
Yeah, it's a lot of
anything
fun.
that gets people thinking about Mars,
Exactly.
I'm all for that.
Yeah, if you
Even
get people,
even Marvin Martian, okay,
I love
is on.
Marvin.
There you go. We didn't throw Marvin in there. She and I could do a 3-hour program. I'll tell you that. So I'm going to have to pull myself back so that she can talk more, because Mars is always on our mind. Yet half
Yeah.
the size of Earth is between the Moon and Earth in size. Here's some Hubble telescope views of it. That very recent, or last year's opposition. We see atmosphere, though it's
Mhm.
a lot like Antarctica. It's cold, like Elton John's song.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
It's our Mars is cold as hell, not a place to raise your kids. Yet it has polar caps that expand and melt. It has these dark features that kind of lose their up close. They're not really continents. They're darker areas. You have these desert areas, and many of these areas have been explored. In fact, the right over here is where Curiosity is. Off of this is Syrtis Major. I know Mars in the back of my hand by sketching it from my backyard telescopes.
Oh,
Made
cool.
my own Mars map in 1988, opposition, just like Schiaparelli and Lowell and
That's very
other
cool.
people did in there, to encourage people that no matter what you do in backyard astronomy,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter if it's scientific or not. You own it. And I'm constantly, Rachel, that nobody owns anything up in the sky.
Nope.
You can write a poem, take a photo, a drawing, whatever you
Yeah.
want with it.
Yeah.
And no one owns the original. But Mars is a very dynamic world that we need to understand more about, because is this the way that the Earth might go?
It's
with
absolutely a
the global
possibility.
warming and so forth, have the life sucked out of it, basically. A very recent
Not in our
picture of
lifetimes, but-
Mars, gorgeous. This is not a painting by Chesley Bonestell
Right.
or Chris Calley, who's watching,
They're
a fabulous
beautiful,
artist. This is a photo by the India orbiter called Hope, all right, of that Syrtis Major area that, once again, one of the rovers is roving right here, Curiosity, in that area there, where there was once a water. We know water was once on Mars. We're not going to
Absolutely.
talk about all that. We're going to talk about Viking looking for life on Mars. That was the goal. And in 1965, we celebrated it last week. On the left is the picture that broke my heart, Rachel, as a teenager, loving Mars and everything about Mars. We were anxious to see Mariner 4 do a flyby on July 14th, 1965, and it showed craters instead of a mountain range of forest with evergreens or any green men waving
No,
at you
no
there.
Yetis, no Martian.
Yep, no, a Yeti would have been
Oh.
good. It would look more like the Earth, or the Moon, than Earth.
Mhm.
Crushed us.
Yeah.
And then we put the first orbiters around in 1969
Yep.
that really kind of did the first reconnaissance and showed such a cratered terrain
Yeah.
that scientists were taken aback and had to figure out, wait a minute,
Mm-hmm.
Mars's atmosphere is so thin that meteorites wouldn't burn up in it. Meteoroids becoming meteors that become
Right.
meteorites on the ground.
Yeah.
So
It's
you're a
the
little bit
Jackson-
younger than me, but Mariner 4 was really a seminal moment in planetary astronomy, when we realized we've got to follow the facts, ma'am, just the facts, as Dragnet says, and not get muddied too much with what our models on Earth showed. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think it's absolutely true. Of course, I have a science background, so I like facts. On the other hand, I am a poet, so I write poems about it too. But I do think that it's really interesting, and you show the pictures from Mariner, really because of that thin atmosphere that you're talking about. Mars was like, I think of it as the Jackson Pollock of the asteroids, right? Because they're just, and they
Yeah.
are creating this planet texture with the force that they're hitting. But if you think about that even deeper, that's part of what makes it really exciting. So
Yeah.
what happens to the planet and inside the planet to create things like Olympus Mons and Valles Marineris and all of these exciting features on Mars, like, even though it didn't have Yeti and green trees, I
Yeah.
still think it's pretty exciting. And
Oh, it is. It
I mean,
has
all the things that we've
for those you
learned.
don't know,
Yeah.
the Valles Marineris is a Grand Canyon that stretches from New York to L.A.
Massive.
All right, the Grand Canyon would just be a little tiny thing in this.
Blip.
And Olympus Mons is a 17-mile, that's right, 17-mile volcano, shield volcano that there's other. Mars basically has a pimple on one side of it.
Yeah.
It's lopsided, and that pimple is caused by a whole area of volcanoes. And this volcano is so tall that if it was centered in Atlanta, we would see it rising above the horizon looking north here in Florida.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Absolutely massive.
Yeah, and we could see it. I saw it through a telescope as a teenager, and we didn't know what it was. We thought, but it was spoken through the
The dust
clouds, and you
storms,
could
yeah.
see it up there. So,
Yeah.
so much about Mars. Like I said, we go down the rabbit hole. We're not going to do that. We want to focus on what this young lady's doing to promote something that's dear to her heart because her father was involved in it. You've created all kinds of posters yourself. This is one of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
you
yeah.
use
So
these as resources in your talks and give
and
to
we
children
provide
and
them
forth?
so we sell them to people that are interested, and those funds go to to the nonprofit. But we also give them to schools and museums, and I've shipped them around the world to different countries that don't have access to stuff like this. But these posters and educational materials is just one of many series that we've developed. They are actually made with the original archives from the mission, with a little bit of explanation about what they are. But in essence, we're giving them raw archives
Huh.
in a manner that's sort of
Good.
a teaser for the kids, right?
We love
Because
that.
that draws them in.
Where
know?
can we get a hold of you if somebody wants to talk about buying these posters for their
Well, you can
class
go
or
to our
something?
website. We don't sell them on our website, but
Which
you
is?
can, the vikingpreservationproject.org.
There you go. Just start putting that Viking Preservation Project. Okay.
Project.org. Yep.
And that's your official patch name, and it's Viking Mars
Right.
Missions Education Preservation.
Correct.
We'll talk about that in a second here.
Yeah.
There you are at an event there.
Holding
Picture
up one of-
pulled off there.
One of our little artifacts.
We're going to talk about that artifact here in a minute.
Now,
But you-
who's that
but
fellow?
Carl Sagan, the really popularizer in the 1970s of everything space. Would have loved to have met him.
He
New
was-
Yorker, so billions and billions was one of his phrases. And
Billions and
a regular on
billions
the
of-
Johnny Carson late night,
Yeah.
the Johnny Carson show.
Yeah.
Johnny Carson actually had a Celestron telescope that he looked through where his palatial estate was.
Cool.
Johnny Carson, of
I
course,
didn't know
the
that.
precursor to your late night shows being done today. Cosmos, a PBS, he's also known
right.
for.
Yeah.
But an advocate for search for life on Mars. And that gives you a good perspective of the lander, the size it was. Two of them, 2 orbiters and 2 landers. Anything you want to say about?
And 2 launch vehicles,
Yeah,
which are really, really special. So we can't forget the launch vehicles.
we'll
Not
show them in
only.
a second. Did your dad say things about Carl Sagan?
Oh yeah, I mean, I met Carl Sagan. He was always around because he was on the science team with my dad.
Uh-huh.
I remembered him as the guy that talked like this.
Uh-huh.
Like, that's how I remember him as a kid. Like, that's a kid memory. I have these memories of the Vikings as different personality types. One of my dad's best friends, Conway Leovi, who was also a Viking, worked on. Well, he worked with the Viking modeling.
Your dad's name?
So James Tillman.
James Tillman.
James
okay.
Eugene Tillman. He worked on the meteorology instrument.
Okay.
So, and he was
Weather instrument on
the
Viking.
weather station on Mars, right? And Seymour Hess was actually the lead principal investigator on that instrument, but unfortunately we lost him fairly early into the mission. And so
Yeah.
my father began leading that team, and then working to, he kept the mission alive beyond the NASA end of life for the mission. So that's a whole unique thing that nobody talks about, or NASA doesn't talk about it, but we
Yeah.
do.
If a space probe doesn't break very early in its mission, they seem to last beyond
Yeah.
what they ever were intended to. And then there was a problem which they didn't have money budgeted to pay those people beyond the 1.5 year mission.
Right.
Excuse me, maybe into 3 years. So
Yeah. Yep. And that was Viking was the first mission that did that, where it survived. And yeah, they started a fundraiser with Ray Bradbury, Heinlein, run by a
Great
fellow named
authors.
Stan, who was a young British astrophysicist. And then the folks that started the Case for Mars series, young astrobiologists that are now NASA. So Chris McKay, Penny Boston, Carol Stoker, all those folks. Yeah.
we're enjoying this talk with Rachel Tillman. You got a question about Mars? See that everybody's enjoying everything so far, including Carl Sagan, a big influencer on us. And,
Definitely.
you know, until we had Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye the Science Guy, there was kind of a dearth of somebody that was promoting and trying to bring down the complexity of science just by being regular guys that say, look, you know, pay attention to this. It has repercussions for humanity. So here was an orbiter and a lander that you said you have this model. I wanted to show what that there was an orbiter, that the lander is in the pod on the bottom that had to re-enter the thin atmosphere still. They had to have a protective heat shield on it, and all kinds of things had to go right for them to land. There was no rover on there. It was stationary, but the long pole there is a robotic arm that scooped up Mars and threw it in an incubator that was a little bit of water on it, and they were going to heat it up and see what happened. And what happened was what?
Well, we had 3 biology instruments actually, and the each one of those. Well, it's interesting too. So when you design an instrument to be flown, it's actually designed way before, you know, you build it and it gets there. So you're starting 10, 15, sometimes 20 years earlier. So you can't change the parameters, i.e. what elements you're looking for halfway down. Even if we learn something in that period, we can't necessarily switch it up to look for something different. So the way that they were designed, each one was looking for a different way of identifying a metabolic process. And so whether it was off-gassing or identifying radioactivity, each instrument did something a little bit different. But each one was designed with a set of parameters that meant if we meet those requirements, we have a positive result. So those are defined well in advance. Well, one out of those 3 instruments actually did have a positive result. Now, there are lots of people that are going to say, oh, we didn't find life on Mars, and it was the perchlorates, and it was all this stuff. But the fact is, we did meet the requirements for what a positive result was. So it is inconclusive. And that's what was actually said and decided to communicate out to the world was it's inconclusive, whether we did or did not find biologic organics. I don't usually use the word life, but unfortunately the press simplifies things. And so they would, you know, we say it's inconclusive and they said Viking failed. So the public didn't get a really good idea of what happened. And not only that, the biology instrument, the 3 biology instruments were one biology was 1 out of 12 different investigations that were going on. So we had 3 investigations on the orbiters. We had the first seismology on Mars. We had the first weather station on Mars.
Dad's weather
Thanks,
station, I
Dad.
was going to say, yeah.
We had
Was there an
imaging.
anemometer on there to spin around like the other thing?
Not quite that way. It was a 3-pronged device that would get wind direction, humidity, temperature, and wind speed, so velocity, etc. And then there was also another little temperature sensor down on the footpad, which ended up being really useful later when they were trying to when they realized that there's a bit of a difference between the feet the temperature on the feet and then the temperature up in
Oh,
the
yes.
instrument. So
uh,
all of those things are really important. And then imaging, that's also a science,
yeah,
right?
like
So,
this,
yeah,
to get pictures like this was incredible.
absolutely.
Mars, on the average, right now it's over 100 million miles away. And as close as it comes, in 2001 or something, it was uh, the closest it had been since humans had been crawling on this earth, like 35 million miles,
Yeah.
about 34 million miles away. All right. The moon is a quarter of a million miles away. So extrapolate that, it's pretty far away. Yet when it comes close every other year, it gets big and bright. It was just this past February was opposition.
Right.
It shines like a garnet, red garnet in the sky. Right now it's low in the western horizon, hard to pick out in the solar in the twilight, and it'll pop up in the morning sky. But Mars, like I said, is like we were talking about the search for life.
Mm-hmm.
This was how it was built, that it was going to search for life with these experiments. And though it had a positive result on the machine, the press bought into the fact that some scientists called it a chemical, not biological reaction. They could
Well,
duplicate.
there was also, the gas chromatograph. So the GCMS also did have indications that there might have been a way for these results to be explained through chemistry.
Yeah.
And that was really what created this, division. Was it chemistry? Was it biology? But
Again, a clump of dirt that they put actually water on, heated it up to hope that if there's any microbes in there, they would die and they would see the outgassing of their biological signatures. Correct?
yeah, well, it wasn't exactly water, but it was sort of a soup, they called it. But
Okay.
but yeah, they gave it something to metabolize, to eat, and then they were looking for,
And
Martian.
it worked.
Martian responding.
They got what they were looking for.
Exactly. The fact that the instruments worked on Viking, all of them, the seismometer, the meteorology instruments, the biology, X-ray fluorescence, all of them worked. There was one broken instrument, that was one of the seismology instruments.
Marty, I see
Yeah.
you have a question.
Yeah, Dave Dang is asking, has any of the 3 biology tests on Viking been reflown and tested on any other land?
Nope. Nothing has gone to test biology on Mars since Viking.
Why?
There's a lot of reasons. So planetary protection was defined, like how we do planetary protection was defined internationally by a consortium, COSPAR, back in the 1950s. And it was decided that everything that went to Mars should be sterilized, particularly if it was going to go into one of the zones that they said might be more likely to have life, than something else. However, Viking was actually the only spacecraft that's been sterilized since then either. So the other ones have been sanitized, which means there's a difference between cleaning them with chemicals versus baking them in an oven and killing anything in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So the challenge is that we haven't really created the opportunity to do that. The budgets for Viking was 20% more because of that whole sterilization process. So if we were going to send another mission that was going to look actually for life, and with all of the minute details that had to be considered, they had a carbon marked hydrazine so that they could determine what that came out of the descent engines when it landed, so that they could actually determine, is this chemical we're seeing fuel or something like fuel, or is it, from the Martian surface, right? So they did all of this incredible work, and it cost a lot of money.
Yeah,
So
1/5 of a project, that is a lot of money.
yeah, 20%. It was pretty massive. So that's one reason. And then the other challenge is that we've got a lot of people that want to go there as humans. And I want us to go there as humans too. But I think that we really need to understand, before we throw any more things at it, and particularly our own biology, what actually is there. And there's so many zones that we really could go into, and that we should go into, in my opinion, to determine if there are biologic organics. We really need to do that. And there's some students and some groups out there that have actually developed instruments and experiments that could potentially do that before humans go to Mars.
Well, we need to
So,
know some of that stuff on
yeah.
there. There could be a COVID-19 virus there, for
I mean,
example.
that's exactly right.
And
If we don't know what's there, we could be putting ourselves in danger just as well as, discovering that whatever it is harmless. The information is important, whether it's harmless or whether it's dangerous. It's important information we should have.
enjoying this conversation, and see Rachel's decked out with some cool show off some of your
Let's see what we got
patches
here.
there and so forth that you have there on there.
So
And,
this one, oops, I'm backwards. So this one is our patch, of
yeah,
course.
we're going to show that patch here in just a second
Yep.
there.
But
Get
this
through
is,
a little bit more of the setup here.
yeah.
Glad to see Dick McDade here with us, and
Hey.
looking at Jubilee answering a question there, something again. He's basically asking if anything could get the Viking up and running again.
So actually, the RTGs, radioactive thermoelectric generators, were anticipated to still be operable all the way to 2022.
Okay.
So the instruments themselves would have been kept warm by the heat created by the RTGs.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, you never know.
If we had
I
the
mean, if you
money
don't-
to pay attention,
If
I
you don't
wish they
drive a
didn't.
car, it does have issues, right?
Yeah.
So when you don't move joints, well, we have issues too, right?
Right.
So if you don't move stuff around, but who knows, right? We have the data. We actually have all the original telemetry and information from the mission so that we would know how we could figure out how to do it. We thought about it. We've talked about it.
Marty, another question?
Yeah, Dean Babcock is asking, have any books been written about the Viking missions? Does your website have in-depth features on the Viking landers?
There have been a number of different books about Viking. A lot of them sort of very fact heavy. We're actually, keep your eyes peeled, we'll say. We do have some facts about the mission on our website, but what we are actually doing is reconstructing, not just preserving, but reconstructing the mission. And that means we're taking the archives and digitally curating them and making the original archives available. So people will actually be able to see the archives and the facts about the mission in raw form, just as they were used for the mission. And then the material that will go around that will be explaining what it is and what the context is and where this particular document is in the context of, funding, design, build, test, launch, data, all of that. So it's really more of a reconstruction of the mission than just the preservation. So there is a number of documents up there. You can see the 300-page response to the RFP for the primary contractor, and that was the proposal for Martin Marietta is actually up there fully, so you can see that and a number of other documents as well.
Again, on your website name, we didn't get that up there. What's
The VikingPreservationProject.org.
VikingPreservationProject.org.
Yep.
Keep reminding of a Kinks album called the Preservation Society in there. Let's get
Good
this
band, by
puppy
the way.
off the ground there.
Beautiful.
Shots that our friend Carlton Bailey used to taking. I don't think Carlton was hanging out at 76 taking pictures, but he's done over 700
Wow.
rocket launches and a
That's
beautiful launch. Quite a fairing on that with a pretty heavy payload.
Yeah.
After all, going and these are launched at opposition when Mars is closest to us to minimize that distance.
Yeah.
And then when we saw the landers, there was two of them, Viking 1 and 2, two orbiters, Viking 1 and 2 orbiters. Seeing frost for the first time on an alien world was quite a moment.
Absolutely. And it was interesting because, I got to hear my dad talking about the information that they were finding as they were finding it. So what are those white looking specks? Is this, lighter colored dust? What is it? Because initially you don't know. If you can't sample it, you don't know for sure. But the way that we discovered actual frost that it was frost and not just light covered dust moving around or sitting on rocks nearby that we couldn't actually quite touch, very frustrating to the geologists, was by taking the same photograph of the footpad over and over again at multiple times of day over several days. And we saw initially that there were, white specks that appeared and disappeared, but they appeared and disappeared with a pattern, and they realized that they were watching it actually condense and refreeze.
Sublimate out.
Exactly. So they were watching that actual process happen, and then they went, "Oh my God, water ice!"
Like dry ice.
That's when they
Didn't leave a
learned
puddle.
that we had water ice on Mars right now.
1976.
1976.
And you mentioned your dad's experiments. There's another picture, more in the daytime. This was evening and mornings when they would see this, okay,
Sunrise,
and then it
yeah.
would go away. If you stood on Mars, and they say, yeah, it might be 50 degrees on the surface of Mars, but that's at your feet. At your knees, it might be 30 degrees, and at your shoulders, 0. Degrees. The atmosphere is that tenuous. At the top of your head could be freezing at 32 degrees while your feet are at 50 degrees.
Well, lot.
Greater difference than that.
Well, no, it was a lot colder than that.
Okay, yeah.
So
I'm being
yeah.
generous there.
Yes. So it was much colder than that.
Yeah, it'd
so
be more like saying if it was freezing at your feet, it would be,
right
five
below
at the top of
below
your feet.
freezing on your below freezing just around your nose and colder and colder.
Good.
But we did have a few temperatures on Earth that were similar to Mars. I think just a couple of years ago they reported that.
Yeah,
That was kind of interesting.
Point is, Mars is
It's
very
really
cold.
cold.
Not thinking about what you think. Antarctica, there are winds. There's all kinds of phenomenon like
Yeah.
twisters, dust devils that cleaned off the Opportunity and Spirit, solar panels and so forth on there. So,
And a lot of
but
fine
that's setting you
dust.
up about what Mars is all about. There's a beautiful panorama of Mars there, taken with the sun in the sky. I forget the operational time of these, Rachel. Was it over 2 years each? Or?
Well, actually, so they lived for over 6.5 years. And that was because when NASA, so they had the primary mission, which was 90 days. And then we went into conjunction. So we couldn't communicate with them during that period.
Too close to the sun.
It went behind the sun, so we had no line of sight with either the orbiters or the landers. Because we could actually, Viking was designed so that we could communicate with the landers or the orbiters independently. So even when the orbiters went out of commission, we still were able to communicate with the landers, which was really cool. And that prolonged the life as well. But there were 2 extended missions, and then NASA ran out of funding. And so they were going to EOL the mission, because that's what, they didn't expect it to last that long.
EOL.
End of life.
Oh, okay. We love acronyms. EOL.
Yes.
End of life.
End of
Okay.
life. Goodbye. Good night. But my dad, in all of his directness, said, "You can't shut down my instrument." And people rallied around my father, and they actually started a fundraiser. So Stan and Heinlein and Ray Bradbury and a lot of people in aerospace came together, and this fundraiser raised over $100,000.
James Tillman.
And my dad, and then
$100,000 in the 70s
Well,
is almost $1 million today.
yeah, and I would say that my dad was the one that didn't want to shut down, but it was Stan was really the organizer of all of that. So kudos to Stan. But they actually so my dad kept that mission alive for another 2.5 years that would have been otherwise shut down. And he ran it from his office at the University of Washington. So
Very
yeah, pretty
interesting.
crazy.
There. Is he a professor there at the University of Washington?
He was a professor, a research
Is that
professor.
in Spokane or
No, Seattle, Washington. Yeah.
Seattle?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, University of
Up
Washington.
there.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying this conversation with Rachel. If you're local, she'll be talking about this at the Italian American Club in Melbourne, just off 1 in the Ugali district. You're welcome to come to our Brevard Astronomical Society meeting. We welcome people to come to a couple meetings. If I catch them at the 3rd meeting, they got to pay dues. Okay, so we've got a very active group here, and but let's get to your activities. Being very active. How many years have you been spearheading your project of the Viking Mars Missions Education and Preservation? And did you who designed this logo for you?
So that was actually a painting I did for my dad. You know those places where you paint on a china plate and then you bake it?
Yeah.
So that's what that actually
Yeah,
is.
Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg,
So
all the tourist traps.
yeah, so there was one of those places in my neighborhood, and so for Father's Day, I painted that on a plate, and the edge of it obviously didn't say that, but it said "In celebration of far out fathers." So
Okay,
yeah,
that's cool.
but yeah. So how many years? I mean, my dad started doing outreach back in the 70s. So in 1979, he actually came to my school because my school, um, we actually purchased a spacecraft. We purchased the Flight Lander, the third Flight Lander off the scrap list. My dad
Wow.
bought that for me back in 1979,
Oh my God.
and we put it in my school to teach kids about robotics and all that stuff. And so there's a picture in here somewhere of my dad talking at the school, and so he began doing education outreach, and I would help him by writing copy for him. We did an exhibit at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, the first exhibit in the world that had live data from a mission.
You're taking this on the road all over. There's a
And
poster at Santa Fe College
Yeah,
in
and-
Gainesville, Florida.
And so now we're doing 8,000 miles, over 8,000 miles, doing these talks literally all over the country.
Bless your heart. There's the
So,
picture of your dad
There
there.
he is. Yep.
James.
That was 1979. The first Lego robotics in the world was back then in 1979, started by my dad and my teacher. Pretty cool stuff.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Pretty cool stuff
So
there.
this has been happening for a while. Now, Jerry Soffin, who's the second from the left, standing, he was
Jerry
the
with the
chief
goatee.
with the goatee. He was the chief scientist of Viking,
Yeah,
and a good friend of
remember him.
a good friend of my dad's.
And
And
who's sitting down? I remember him too.
so that's Hal Mazursky. And then
Okay.
on the right, we've got Noel Hinners, and then Jim Carr on the
Okay.
left.
They're looking at photographs. It looks like on
yeah.
the table there.
Yeah.
And this is the hairstyles of the 70s guys there.
1970s.
Okay. But your dad, awesome. Wish we had a couple picture better. You have in your program, you said better pictures. But
Yeah.
your dad liked that kind of outreach, I gather.
Well, yeah. I mean, he loved talking to kids. In fact, T.A. Wilson of Boeing called my dad, "Aren't you the guy that talks to kids?" I mean, that's what, and that started back
Wonderful.
way back in the 70s, and that made my dad really, really happy, was to share. And so I've really followed in his footsteps, to be honest.
Well, that's a good daughter there.
And so I've been
There's
doing
the
it for
team and-
20 years. I founded our
Awesome.
nonprofit
And
20
when
years.
did you lose your dad?
2 years ago
Oh, okay.
at 90.
Well, that's a good,
I mean,
healthy, long
He
life
lived.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he did.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And-
And Viking influenced, like this picture is of the interns. So young students that worked on the mission. Viking was the first mission that actually had students working on it. And some of these were as young as 17 years old. One kid, I mean, not a kid now, but actually bicycled across the United States to Jet Propulsion Laboratories to show up and be an intern on the Viking mission. Can you
Rode his
believe that?
bicycle.
So kids out there, don't give up. Do
Right.
crazy things to work on space missions.
Well, I'm enjoying Rachel. You're so articulate and you know so much, and it's coming across so well, I think, as our listeners are also really enjoying this. There's a group of the old timers you're with there.
Yeah.
Oh
my
dear
gosh.
to your heart as you reacted there.
Yeah. So our job one from the very beginning has been to not just curate. So we will be curating everything digitally, but the most important thing we can do right now is to get these oral histories from the individuals that worked on the mission before they pass away.
So these are all workers on the Viking
These are
project
all
in the 70s.
gentlemen that worked on the Viking mission in a variety of different roles. I see a couple of them are interns.
What was this occasion,
Um,
Rachel?
So I've been putting together Viking gatherings since like 2004. I'll go into a city, find as many Vikings as I can, and we'll go out to dinner. In this case, we went to, this was Pasadena, California, and we went to the Panda Inn, which was the first restaurant that they all would go to after work at JPL.
Okay,
But we have
Panda
people
Inn.
there that worked on the azimuth. We have folks that worked on the orbiter, folks that worked on telemetry. One intern, Alf, who's standing next to me, figured out how to recondition a battery on another planet.
Hmm.
That's pretty far
valuable
out.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First of its
Absolutely.
kind.
Well, bless you for keeping these people in the game still. I'm sure they
Yeah.
appreciate the reunion
Well,
aspect of it and the fellowship.
they're amazing people. I mean,
Yeah.
they've formed me. There's no question that the people that I grew up with that were around my dad formed me.
Well, you take the physical vehicle like
Mhm.
this,
Yep.
and you bring pieces and parts into young students' lives here.
Yeah.
And there's another schematic that could be pretty valuable at an auction there. Part of the
Not selling anything.
electrical thing there. I've told you, just let people know that you have some cool stuff there. But what we have here,
So what we do is we have a number of different educational programs, and one of those is our signature Mars Maker series. So what that is we spend a few months gathering together scrap material at whatever location we're going to do this event in. So we did one in Australia in Brisbane. We've done them in Mars, Pennsylvania.
I like that,
we've-
Mars, Pennsylvania.
Right? We've done them in
Mars
Oregon.
candy, by the way.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And they tried to sue my dad for a project that he did that was educational. Anyway, that was funny. They backed down. My dad won. Sorry.
Good.
But so we put these schematics and drawings in front of students, and then we have them. We have students that are kind of bachelor's program students, some masters, PhDs, as team leads for each different segment of the spacecraft. And then what we do is we have them work with students to recreate the spacecraft out of scrap material.
They're pointing at that.
So they look at
schematic right here.
they look at the diagrams, and then they go to the scrap table and they find something that looks kind of like it. And what we challenge the kids to do is we talk about how each of the parts of the spacecraft are mobile, and everything that moves, that's mechanical, we want it to be able to move on our reproduced artistic representation spacecraft. So we've actually had 3 degrees of movement on like our surface sampler, our S-band antennas moved, radar altimeters, all of these things. We teach the kids about basic engineering by recreating these things and having fun. And then the kids that are volunteering, they actually learn how to manage a team of people that are not their classmates. And that is challenging.
What valuable lessons they're learning there. I love it. That's science, technology, engineering, arts,
All of it.
and math all in there. So what Marty has here, Chris Callie, Chris Callie is our watcher. His
yeah.
dad, Paul Callie, world-renowned artist like
Very
Chris. And we're
cool.
going to zoom in on this. Thank you, Chris, for sharing this with us. There, this is
That's awesome.
Have you seen that before?
I have seen that. Yeah.
Oh, this is a Mars mission patch with the symbol
Yeah.
for Mars, which is also the symbol for a man, arrow and a circle there. And thank you,
There's a lot of-
Chris. And he said sketch for JPL in 1971
That's very cool.
at the and that is the patch there. So
That's one of the that was one of the designs. That's beautiful, by the way. I just want to say, as an artist, I appreciate that as well as a historian. So thank you for
yeah.
very cool.
Marty, thank you for sharing that.
Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Glad that Chris is on here. We're going to see Chris on the show Friday. He's coming into town for a Yuri's Night One Space
Yes,
evening.
that's coming up.
I'm going to be one of his schleppers there to help him. He's got some beautiful artwork, and we'll have Chris
love
on
it.
here
Love it.
Friday in a very informal Stay Curious to maybe take your questions about the great artist and how his
Yeah.
mind works on putting these things together. His dad did the stamp for the moon stamp for Apollo.
And that's
Okay.
I mean, the kind of impact that has. So these illustrations, like what Chris just brought up, they don't just influence us here in the US, but countries around the world see these pictures and they do stamps with them. I mean, there were Viking stamps in Granada. Vikings showed up on stamps all around the world. It
Oh,
was
I hear
the art created and inspired by Viking was absolutely transformational around the world. So, my baby.
That's
So
what your dad bought.
so that's the spacecraft, the flight spare from the mission. So that was actually flight qualified, which means that everything that's on it.
Wow. And where's it at now?
So it is under wraps right now.
Okay.
We are raising funds to purchase a building, and that will house all of our archives, the spacecraft, all the hardware that we have, which we have quite a bit of from the Viking mission. If people have
What
Viking
location
documents
you
out there,
thinking about?
TBD.
TBD. Okay.
But we are raising the funds to purchase a building right at the moment.
Alright.
We have a couple of, ideally in Oregon, because we want to go to a place where there isn't a bunch of space stuff, right? And I'm in Oregon, so I can actually make it super robust, right, by being there. But the main thing is that we want it to be in a place where there isn't, like, we don't have a space coast. We don't have a space industry.
Not in
We
Oregon.
want to give things to kids that don't have access to
Got a
them.
good football team.
Yeah, you got some
beat the
history
snot
there,
out
I
of
heard.
Michigan and Ohio State. But
But yeah, we want to give things to kids that don't have access to it.
that's awesome.
Yeah. So
That's
so
great.
probably in
Well, that's very interesting. A real flight approved lander there.
Yep.
That you don't come across that every day.
yeah.
Basically the platform of the lander there.
Yeah.
And I hope you're enjoying as much as I. Rachel Tillman here. Looks like she's going to be a good friend of our museum going down the road. I'll keep tabs with you and share it with our Stay Curious watchers. I see RG Jubilee's asking, are they going to send another helicopter
Oh,
so
I
we
love
can
the
see
helicopter.
more of the landscape of Mars? Well,
So
first we got to harvest those test tubes up there that we dropped with maybe life signatures in it before the Chinese go and grab them out from under us.
I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
right? We have put so much money invested. We have invested in the sample return mission, regardless of how much it has cost so far.
Yep.
You don't build a building just to tear it down, right?
Right. Or build a building without the elevators already
I mean,
on the drawing board. That's the
but you don't
fallacy. They
throw
have
you don't
a-
put money into something and
Yeah.
then just leave it empty.
If
And
you
it's
don't know,
right?
we're talking about perseverance is harvesting samples, putting them in sort of a test tube thing, dropping them along
Exactly.
the way that were supposed to be harvested by another roving spacecraft that would have a rocket on it to send it back to
send it-
Earth.
Mhm.
And the money's not even appropriated to build that,
No.
to bring it back. If they do, luckily it'd be 10 years to get it.
Yeah.
And I seriously think China might try to get them. Hey, thank you very much for doing this. We'll send our helicopter over
I mean, it wouldn't
and
surprise
pick it
me.
up. But Jubilee mentions the helicopters. That has
So-
been a game changer
Absolutely.
for science to get around Mars and so forth, hasn't
So
it?
keep your eyes peeled for helicopters.
Well, there's one going to Titan, maybe.
Yeah. So,
the moon of
we
Saturn.
have a lot more things that are happening in that arena,
Yeah.
and I don't know what I'm allowed to say, so I need to be careful.
Okay. Well, that little we don't want to get you in trouble on Stay Curious. A worldwide program here. Trickled down to JPL. Yet let the cat out of the bag. But
Yeah.
no, this little helicopter Ingenuity was
Oh,
supposed to be 5
awesome.
test flights. I think they did over 70.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
Became a reconnaissance to actually tell Percy where to go. And yeah, just a huge game changer
Yeah,
on there. So thank you for
absolutely.
bringing that up there, Jubilee. Oh, we got more kids involved there as we're
Yeah.
winding up this conversation with Rachel. So if you got another question, get it in the queue there for Marty to share.
Absolutely. So those are more kids at one of our Maker Fair events. This one's actually at OSU, at Oregon State.
Okay,
Yeah. So
go Ducks.
yeah.
Or-
Now,
you are
and this
doing
is
your
part of
thing?
our tour now. So as I mentioned, we're calling this 8,000 plus miles. I've already hit over 5,000 miles in my van, driving around the country. I've been camping.
Okay,
It has not all been pretty.
all right.
Let's just say that. But the amazing thing is all of the people that I meet on the way, and I talk to people about space, everybody, random folks. I mean, I walk up to people and I'm like, do you like space? And some of them look at me like I'm crazy and turn and walk away quickly, you know. But a lot of them are like, yeah, it's really interesting, or no, it's scary. And so then we have these conversations, and you can actually see some of the conversations, just some of the questions. I started a series, what does space mean to you? And that's on our YouTube. But this is a talk that was put together by AIAA just about a mile away from JSC, and we had some amazing people there, including a fellow who worked on Viking that I hadn't found yet. And so I've got his number in my bag, and we'll be doing an oral history interview with him as well. And in fact, we had a fellow from the Hungarian consulate at that talk. I mean, amazing mixture of people. We had 3 students. I had an 11-year-old at a planetarium that knew what an RTG was.
Wow, that's pretty
Right.
good.
So
Yeah.
it's all about reach, right? Audiences of all ages, just sharing what the mission was, and not just what it did scientifically and in terms of engineering, but the kind of leadership that they had, which was very unique as well. So
We've had a lot of nice comments here where Jim McDade says it'd be cool to have a Pete Conrad Al Bean picture of on the moon with a Viking in the background or something like that. Dean Babcock, no, I said Robert Laws met Carl Sagan at a Glasgow University lecture in 1985.
nice.
I did not know Andy Chalkin
Andy Chaikin, yeah.
was a jet propulsion lab during Viking, an intern.
He was one of the interns.
He wrote the seminal books on the moon landings there. And thank you for the compliment there, Dean Babcock. He said, "This is why I watched Stay Curious. I did not know really much at all about the Viking missions. Thanks."
Oh, well, you're
Yeah.
welcome. I mean, and the interns, just to talk about, we're kind of skipping by things. There's so much. I mean, we could talk for hours.
Yeah.
But so
we
many of
could.
the Viking interns went on to do other things in aerospace, not necessarily science and engineering, as Andy Chaikin is an amazing writer and historian. But we had people like Ken Carpenter as the chief scientist on Hubble, right? We had folks that went to work at JPL afterwards. We had Iris Mack became a mathematician and teacher, amazing. We have folks that ended up in nuclear energy. I mean, these interns were so inspired by working on Viking that tells, I mean, that's part of why I do this, right? Those kids were inspired. Hopefully the kids that we come in contact with are inspired. And if they want to work in space, they don't have to be a scientist or an engineer. They can be an artist. They can be a communications person, a writer. They can be a technician. They can come up with the next form factor, just an idea of something that hasn't been done before, like a helicopter. Right?
Exactly. Great to inspire the youth there for sure, Rachel. And somebody mentioned here, Michael Bruno, it's amazing Viking landed pretty much level with all those large boulders around. But
I mean,
as you know, the profile
two-
is not like the intuitive machines, a tall little rectangle
Right.
with skinny legs spreading out. It is a rectangle on its side with the legs
Well,
splayed
it's
out
actually
there.
it's a triangle
Yeah,
with the corners cut off, so
right,
3 legs.
yeah.
But on Viking 2, we actually did end up with a foot pad, one of the feet on a boulder, so it was tipped a little bit.
But
So,
it's not going to tip over.
but it didn't tip over,
with
yeah,
the ratio
because
that
of
they
the way
built
it was
these,
designed.
yeah, that's,
Yeah, amazing design.
and some companies haven't learned that's not that you can't make something taller than wider and land it on an alien world. But we're not.
Yeah,
gonna.
there's
Well, here's a couple little from your scrapbook of your
Yeah.
8,000
So-
to be mile journey there.
we have when we find a Viking, we want to go to them and interview them. So I had the awesome opportunity to interview Jerry Snyder there and his partner, and so we drove to his house and sat there and interviewed Jerry, and it was phenomenal. And
That's in where?
well, I don't want to be disclosed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Southwest America,
yes.
it looks like.
Yes,
And
exactly.
then another friend there.
And then, yeah, again, he came to our talk at that was close to JSC. So we're meeting these folks all over the place. And if there's anybody that worked on Viking, please call me.
All right.
You
What do
know,
you have
email
here that he
me.
has in here? Is his hand here.
Oh, yes. So that is actually the descent engine. It's the shroud around the Viking lander descent engine. So you are holding it in the right position. Thank you. And exactly. And
So
that is
light.
made out of exactly. Okay, I'm going to do to you what I do to the kids. What do you think it might be made out of?
Gold.
Okay, well, you're right on the outside. So what would make
I
it
know.
really light?
Aluminum,
What happens to aluminum in heat?
but it melts.
Okay.
So it's more like titanium.
You got it.
Okay.
Gold-plated titanium. And they developed the shroud out of gold-plated titanium because it's very heat convective. So on the outside of the descent engines, you want to whisk that heat
Of course, you've
away
got
from the
it in a
spacecraft.
package here
Really,
so it doesn't get
right? It's a
damaged.
cutaway. Yeah.
But that's actual size, huh?
Yeah. No, that's an actual artifact.
And how
That's
many
it.
were there of these?
Well, there was a descent engine on each side of the lander.
Okay.
So, but these artifacts, they're
Or
three. Yeah.
three. Okay.
Yeah. So three landers. You know, we have the flight spare, but most things were scrapped beforehand. These items were donated to us by Don Morrissey, who worked at Rocket Research. So a lot of the companies that worked on the mission are donating their artifacts to us because they know that we do not sell anything. So we don't make money off of this at all. I'm not paid to do any of this. This is purely volunteer work, and it is done specifically to make sure that the Viking mission stays together and that it doesn't end up in pieces all over the place in random people's garages.
Well, you're a lot like our friends that are restored the Astro 1 telescope in the payload bay of the shuttle that are having a big event in Huntsville at the U.S. Rocket Ranch this weekend there. So,
very cool.
winding
Yeah.
it up here with Rachel, we've got this young student here.
So one of the things that I mentioned is students. They're really, really important to us. We invite students to come to our archive and do unboxing videos with us, which is fun, number one. These archives haven't been seen in over 40 years, and we don't know what's in them. And so when we look in these boxes for the first time in 40 years, we have found some incredible things. So these students have had the opportunity to see these items. So Gabby is actually an astrobiology student.
I see one of these laying there on the
Right,
table.
exactly, yeah. And so she got to open up a couple of boxes and see what was in them for the first time. And then we have the students do some archiving with us. So we teach them what we do so that they understand, oh, it's not just sitting there scanning stuff. There's a lot more to it. And again, that's why we're buying a building. So fundraising to buy the building, because we need to have a permanent place where they can come to do this that's better than its current location.
Well, good luck to Gabby there. And
yeah. So she's an astrobiology student, an awesome person. And there's I think the next one is kind of fun, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So what does this mean anyway? So the Martian, I mean, that all makes sense, right?
An old television character.
Yeah. So Alf has meaning because Gabby is working on the Alpha Mars mission.
Alpha Mars mission.
So Alpha Mars is the experience, I mentioned it earlier, is a group of students and a principal investigator that are being that are working on a way to piggyback on core samples that are done by folks that want to resource mine, right, Mars. Because we think that we need to determine if there is biological organics, they've developed an instrument that can actually extract the water from these core processes. So you're going and mining, no humans there yet. We're digging cores out to see what's there, to figure out what can we 3D print on Mars, whatever. They can piggyback their instrument with that mining company and determine if we have biologic organics. That is important. So I support what they're doing.
We support Alf.
We need to do that. And besides, he's cute and Alf likes to hang out with the Martian. So.
Well, Rachel, thank you so much. You guys and ladies all enjoyed this with this very articulate and Martian-oriented lady like myself there. I threw this slide in here. This is former NASA Administrator Don Nelson holding a picture of a Chinese lander on Mars.
Yeah.
Before he went out of office, he was openly saying we are in a space race with China, and he wanted to emphasize when they landed on Mars, this is what they're doing, okay, just like us, and we need to pay attention to that. So, little wake up call there.
I mean, they will absolutely do what we should be doing first before us, including, as you mentioned, grabbing our samples. I mean,
if I was them, I'd be developing it. If we're not going to go get them, somebody needs to before humans pick them up and put it in their pocket there. So looking forward to tomorrow night at the Italian American Club. Come about 6 o'clock and have some adult beverages and sandwiches and so forth out of their deli. It's quite a fun place. Marty,
I'm
you've
looking
been
forward to
there.
it.
We had the Grummies there. Marty and one of his friends, Roger, talking about the Apollo landings one time on a lasagna dinner. That was a lot of fun.
Yum.
So Brevard Astronomical Society featuring you
Thank
at
you,
their
thank you.
monthly meeting there, Rachel, and I'm really looking forward to it.
No,
So
I appreciate that. I'm
You're very
looking forward to
welcome.
it too.
anything I didn't say that you wanted to get across to our wise audience out there?
You know, everybody around the world has participated. This is really important. So Viking was truly an international mission. Now NASA doesn't call it that, but the chief engineer and the chief scientist were both first generation Americans. We had folks that were immigrants that came to the country and worked on Viking. That's really important to know. So we have the depth of all of the perspectives, culture, education style. If you go to a school in Germany and you study the same thing that a school here teaches, you're going to learn things differently. So having all of those different perspectives is really, really important. So knowing that Viking was like that and was so successful, I think is a testament to how important it is that we keep really a lot of different diverse perspectives in all of our space missions, like we did on Viking.
Well said, Rachel, and we're so glad to keep your father, James Tillman's memory alive here, and you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
And I think all of you see what a worthy cause this is, one of the pioneering NASA missions, so many of them, but this one really took the veil off of Mars and what we needed to do in the future with other the spacecraft that you know that roved Mars there. So look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. Hope that
Sounds
you're
good.
there. And tomorrow, Marty and I will have a brief half-hour show as we have a board meeting. And then Thursday, we're going to have Robert Granath on here to talk about the Vostok 1 spacewalk of Alexei Leonov and how a lucky guy he was. He came back alive. So, Marty, anything to clean up over on our production?
Nope, I think we're all good.
Well, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, Marty. And until tomorrow, I'm Mark Marquette saying we will see you again to bridge the space between us.